Hello my friends and welcome back to another Baldur's Gate 3 character building guide. Hope you're all doing well. Today we're covering the most terrifying character in Baldur's Gate. This character will leave enemies reeling in fear, trapped in clouds of darkness and unable to act. In fact, it will shut down enemies for the first 3 turns of combat usually, leaving them completely unable to act, trapped in their own nightmares, and if they should somehow escape, you can simply shove them right back in again. This character is extremely powerful against any enemy that is susceptible to fear, which is most non-undead enemies. So there is a slight dip in terms of power in Act 2, but of course you're just going to have full spell casting to get through Act 2, and in Act 1 and 3 you're going to be terrifyingly unstoppable in just about every single combat. This character uses a bunch of Warlock levels in order to maximize our fear and also give us some of the best casting, damage, and defensive capabilities in the game, and mixes them with an interesting character mix that can let you really shine with some of the Warlock class features. Let's jump in and start talking about the build. Before I do begin, though, I do want to say thank you so much to Pierre Pst for the 15 euros, Dr. Raz for the $20, Amatsin for the 15 euros, Cheney X for the £2, and Dante977 for becoming a channel member. Thank you so much, my friends. It really does mean a lot to me, and I really do appreciate it. Alright, let's jump in and start building the Face of Fear. I'm using Wyll as the example character here, both because this is primarily a Warlock build, and because also I think that Human is one of the better picks for race for this build, although I think in some ways, flavor-wise, it actually fits Astarion better, because it's all about hiding in darkness and scaring people, which is a little more Astarion's thing than Wyll's thing, but either character, I think, works pretty well in terms of flavor, and of course if you're building this for a main character, then like most Warlock builds, the best pick for race is going to be half Drow, because it gets you shield proficiency, which is very important, as well as the additional cast of darkness per day, which is very helpful when you're playing a Warlock. Other good options include Dwergar, because the out-of-combat invisibility is extremely valuable, since this build is going to be in stealth an awful lot, and that lets you position yourself perfectly for stealth. And half Wood Elf for the shield proficiency and bonus movement speed is also an excellent pick. Githyanki for bonus Misty Step and medium armor I think is slightly worse because you will probably want to be in robes for this build, so the medium armor proficiency is less important than the shield proficiency, but as always, that's always a good pick, so any of those options are always good. For Wyll himself, we get shield and light armor proficiency and the bonus skill point, which is also pretty nice when playing a human. We're going to begin with a level of Rogue, and the reason for this is twofold. One, we're going to need Rogue levels for this build, and two, or I guess threefold. One, we're going to need Rogue levels for this build, so we gotta take them somewhere. Two, this lets us get a bunch of extra skill points, which lets this character provide a ton of additional utility to your team, because you can have both party face skills and lockpicking and stealth skills, and we're going to need the stealth skills as well. Getting early stealth and sleight of hand expertise is very useful for every party, and this lets this character fill both the party face role and the stealth and lockpicking role, meaning that your skill requirements are basically entirely covered by this one character. You also want to take Rogue first, and the leveling order is somewhat important here because the key class feature of this build, the Warlock's Mortal Reminder, uses the same save DC rules that items in Baldur's Gate do, where it keys off of your most recent new class. So we need to take our first level in Rogue before we take our first level in Warlock, so that will key off our Charisma. If you are confused by that statement, don't worry about it. Just follow the order given here and everything will work out just fine. So, we're going to have our initial level be Rogue, but we're going to take a somewhat unusual attribute spread because we are looking to take most of our levels in Warlock, so we want to have an attribute selection that helps with that. So, we are going to clear all of these attributes and pull these out. We are going to put 16 points in Charisma, because that will be important for our Warlock spells, 12 in Wisdom, just for saving throws, 16 in Constitution, because that gives us our maximum possible number of hit points and also makes our Constitution saves good, which is great when we're trying to maintain concentration on spells. This character will always be concentrating on a spell, usually Darkness or Hunger of Hadar, but having high constitution saves means that you can maintain those concentrations even if you take damage, and then we take 14 dexterity for AC and initiative. For our skill selection, we get to take an awesome set of skills, meaning we get sleight of hand and stealth expertise. This is incredibly useful, and then we get to take our pick of dialogue skills. Wyll comes with Persuasion by default. That's his human pick, and so we can have him have Persuasion, Deception, and Intimidation. We can get all 3 dialogue skills. You could also take one fewer of these and put this point into Insight if you wanted, because rogues get access to that, and get the other important dialogue skills there. With a different background selection, like Guild Artisan, you could have all of the dialogue skills if you wanted to do this for a Tav build, but for Wyll, you can still have him be a party face with all the dialogue skills, as well as Sleight of Hand and Stealth using this setup, which I think is really cool, because this character covers all of our skill needs in a single character. That's it for our level 1 picks. Other than that, nothing to change here. You may be wondering if we're going to struggle at level 1 on the Nautilus, just because we only have 14 dexterity. The answer is no. You'll do just fine on the Nautilus as a rogue with 14 dexterity. If you're really worried about it, you can respec later, but I think that this is a totally reasonable way to get through the Nautilus. It will not penalize you in any way. At level 2, we immediately branch out and start taking Warlock levels. Now, we get to have Eldritch Blast, which was going to be our primary damage source for the entire game, and one of the great things about this build is that already at level 2, the core play pattern of the build is online, and that is hitting things with Eldritch Blast and using Great Old One Warlock's Mortal Reminder to frighten enemies. When you score a critical hit with Eldritch Blast, which you're more likely to do when you're hidden, so if you're in stealth, you'll have advantage, which makes you more likely to get critical hits, an enemy has to pass a saving throw or become frightened. This is an incredibly powerful ability because frightened is a brutal condition. Enemies cannot move while frightened, and they have disadvantage on all their attack rolls, so it's really good against ranged enemies as well. This completely shuts down all melee enemies and makes ranged enemies significantly less dangerous to you, and as a Warlock in a couple levels, we're going to completely shut down ranged enemies with Darkness, so as long as you can consistently land Mortal Reminder fears, you are going to keep enemies from acting ever. This is incredibly powerful. For our second cantrip selection, we are going to take Minor Illusion. This is really useful for all stealth builds because it can turn enemies around, so you can use it to have enemies look away from you, so you can stealth into the correct position, and also it can be used to group enemies for the AoE spells that we'll get at later levels. Minor Illusion is incredibly powerful. I think it might be the single best spell in the game, and because there's no saving throw and repositioning enemies is just so valuable in so many fights. The creative uses with this spell are endless, and I recommend using them. The fact that this is a rogue build or a stealth build that also gets access to this on the same character means this character kind of gets all in one of all the best things for stealth builds in the game. Great Old One gets us Mortal Reminder, which is incredible, so that's the reason that we're here, because this is a fear-based build. And then for our spell selection, we are going to take Hex, because all Warlocks should take Hex. It's a core part of your damage. You can use a bonus action to cast Hex and then Eldritch Blast, and that is kind of the baseline damage for Dungeons & Dragons. A Warlock with Hex and Eldritch Blast does like the amount of damage that you should measure as being good damage. That's what... that is the yardstick for measuring good damage, is this character class. And for our second spell, it's a choice here between Armor of Agathis and Dissonant Whispers. I like having Dissonant Whispers at level 1. This can help with adding in more fear, which is very powerful, and it can shut down really dangerous melee enemies. In particular, this is useful against some of the really scary enemies that you'll face in early levels, like the Gnoll or the Owlbear, that you can just completely shut them down with Dissonant Whispers for 2 turns, and that's extremely powerful, and will help you win a lot of those early combats much more smoothly. At character level 3, we get to take our second level of Warlock, and we get Agonizing Blast, increasing our Eldritch Blast damage by our Charisma modifier, and then we take Devil's Sight because Devil's Sight lets us see in darkness. These are going to be, I would say, 98% of Warlocks are going to take these two Eldritch Invocations at Warlock level 2, and this build is no exception. We want to be hiding in darkness, and we want to be Eldritch Blasting things, so these are the natural two. For our spell selection, at this level, we're going to grab Armor of Agathis or Dissonant Whispers if we haven't picked it up yet. Picked the other one up yet. Those are both very useful, so it is really nice to have both of them. We don't need to replace a spell because we already have the 3 perfect spells, so we are very happy here and can go to level 3. At Warlock level 3, we get access to second level spells, and we also get to take our Pact Boon. For second level spells, of course, the one we're going to select first is Darkness. Darkness is what we're going to be concentrating on in most combats, and is just an incredibly powerful effect. It makes you almost completely immune to ranged enemies, and because we can see through it, we will have advantage, we'll be hidden inside it, so we'll have advantage on all of our attacks, and enemies will have disadvantage on all of their attacks. This means we're much more likely to trigger Mortal Reminder critical hits, which is incredibly useful for us as well, since that means just more fears that we're spreading around the battlefield. You can, at this point, also replace Dissonant Whispers with another spell. I like hanging on to Armor of Agathis for a couple more levels, though we may want to replace it later, because we'll just have better use for our spell slots. But I don't think there's anything critically important to grab at this level. The best is probably Misty Step, just for a defensive ability. So whether you want Misty Step or whether you want Dissonant Whispers really depends on whether you're still actually casting Dissonant Whispers. If you aren't, just grab Misty Step, and it will pick it up next level regardless, because Dissonant Whispers damage is going to start falling off pretty quickly. So just for the sake of making things easy, we're just going to do that now. Then for our Pact Boon, we're not a Pact of the Blade build. We are not going to be making melee attacks. So it's really your choice between Chain or Tome. Chain is the better one if you aren't getting the unique imp, the unique Quasit, because the imp is very good and can help threaten enemies, which can keep them. You can scout with it invisibly, which is very useful for setting up combats, and it can help threaten enemies. It does a little bit of damage. If you are getting the unique Quasit, then just grab the Pact of the Tome, because these abilities are all useful. Guidance is really nice to have on your lockpicking character, because sometimes you'll want them to be doing lockpicking and things like that away from the rest of your party, so having guidance on them specifically can help a lot. The other two cantrips aren't amazing, though pulling enemies with Thorn Whip does come up a surprising amount with Warlock, because if an enemy backs off to the other side of your Hunger of Hadar or other damaging AoE effect, you can pull them back into it, provided that you can get within 30 feet of them. Sometimes you can't manage that, but it is pretty useful to be able to do this, and repositioning enemies is always powerful, so keep an eye out for situations where you want to use this. Of course, pulling enemies down from cliffs is the most common one, but there's a lot of opportunities to do cool stuff with Thorn Whip as well. We have already replaced our spell, so that's it for level 3. Let's go to level 4. At Warlock level 4, we get to take a feat, and the feat that we're going to take is Charisma. This character does additional damage based on its Charisma. You're also a dialogue character, so you want to max out your Charisma as much as possible, and that is, of course, incredibly powerful. You could even go for a 17 Charisma build and take Actor here if you really want to lean into the dialogue skills. So you could have started 17 Charisma and 10 Wisdom and taken Actor. That is an option to get expertise into dialogue skills and get even more skills for this character, which lets you be an even better party face, and may even be the better way to build the character if that's what you're looking to do. But just make sure that you hit 18 Charisma at this level. For our cantrip selection here, we can take Friends, if that's something that we are potentially interested in casting. If you're using this as a party face, Friends is always nice to have. And especially at this level, you're about to enter Act 2, where there's a lot of charisma-based dialogue checks where you don't care if the person gets mad after, because you're trying to talk them into fighting you, usually, or just talk your way through an encounter. And so Friends doesn't even have a disadvantage at all in most of Act 2, and is a very powerful skill as a result. If you're not using this character as a party face, you can take Blade Ward. Blade Ward's really nice for protecting Armor of Agathis hit points, but I'm going to recommend taking Friend. And you could even grab Minor Illusion on a different character and take Friends at level 1 if you want to do that. For our spell selection here, we should pick up Cloud of Daggers, just because it's so useful to have no save damage. We'll probably end up, you'll be concentrating on darkness most of the time, but Cloud of Daggers is a great alternative for a lot of these levels, very good at finishing off low health enemies, and is incredibly powerful as a result of that. Some other options are invisibility if you really want to lean into the stealth aspect of the character, but I don't think you need it, invisibility. It's more useful to get this from a wizard or something who can prepare it as needed rather than have to spend a warlock spell known slot on it. Hold Person is also good because you can guarantee critical hits, and then they will get feared by the Mortal Reminder. Of course, if they're already paralyzed, then you don't need to fear them from Mortal Reminder. So Hold Person is a little bit unreliable, but still very, very powerful. If you have save DC increasing gear, it's a very powerful effect, and definitely a good option as well. And then at Warlock level 5, we get a huge power spike for our Warlock because we get 3rd level spells. All Warlocks get a massive boost to power at this level. Well, all spellcasters do, but Warlocks especially do because they get access to 2 of the very best spells in the entire game, and they can cast them many times per day, more times per day than any other character can, thanks to how Warlock spell slots work. And that lets you take Hunger of Hadar and then replace another spell. We're probably going to replace either Armor of Agathis or Cloud of Daggers at this point with Counterspell. Counterspell is so good and so important, and Warlocks can always cast it with their highest level spell slot, meaning it's very reliable for Warlocks. Whether Counterspell works or not is based on the spell slot of your spell compared to the spell slot of enemy spells, and so countering spells with Warlocks always uses your highest level spell slot, meaning you will always counter spells. Now, level 6 spells Warlocks are going to struggle with, so you still want Counterspell on a full caster somewhere in your party, probably, but this just makes your party so much safer because any of the most dangerous effects in the game you can stop immediately with Counterspell. An incredibly powerful effect that gives you a ton of additional options. For Eldritch Invocation here, we're going to grab Repelling Blast because if enemies escape our Hunger of Hadar, then we can push them back into it with Repelling Blast, and if enemies are feared and we're pushing them away, they're not moving and we're pushing them away, which means that melee enemies are never going to actually reach us to attack us. This character therefore shuts down melee enemies almost single-handedly, and all melee enemies are going to struggle massively against this character. And against ranged enemies, you have Darkness, so you can basically single-handedly shut down either all ranged or all melee enemies in any given combat. Combats with mixes of the two are going to be a little bit more dangerous, but if there are combats where it's only one or the other, you kind of auto-win with this character because you get to push them away and lock them down with fear, trap them in Hunger of Hadar until they just take out to the damage over time, or cast Darkness and bunch up your party inside the darkness, making yourself immune to ranged attacks. Either way, you have the perfect answer to what the enemies are doing, and even in combats with mixed enemies, dropping Hunger of Hadar on a bunch of ranged enemies and melee enemies is still very, very powerful. At Warlock, at character level 7, we are going to go back to levels of Rogue. We now have the best things from Warlock. 3rd level spells is what we really wanted to get to as soon as possible, so that's why we took 5 Warlock levels in a row. But now we're going back for Rogue and to get the core combo of this build online. Level 2 Rogue is actually really good for Warlocks or all casters, just in general, because the bonus action Hide, Dash, and Disengage are all incredibly valuable for Warlocks. Warlocks only really have one bonus action that they want to be using, and that's Hex. And then at these levels, you're going to be concentrating on other spells most of the time anyways. So adding in relevant bonus actions for your Warlock is incredibly useful. This means that if an enemy gets into melee with you, you can bonus action disengage and just walk away, and then push them further away with Repelling Blast. If you need to hide and gain advantage on your next attacks, you can bonus action hide, and the fact that you can cast Darkness and then bonus action hide in your own Cloud of Darkness means you'll always have the availability of cover. You can always hide because you can darkness and then hide in your own darkness, so you'll always have potential obscurement for your hiding, and that's a very synergistic build as well. Bonus action dashes give you a ton of additional mobility, which is very, very powerful for obvious reasons, but especially so for a character like this that's going to be kiting enemies backwards across the battlefield, stopping them from moving and pushing them backwards as you go. Having more mobility yourself means that melee enemies will never ever reach you because you can bonus action dash, still make your attacks, still move, and push the enemies away, lock them down with fear, and continuously retreat or run enemies in circles thanks to your incredible mobility advantage. This is a very powerful combination that is somewhat underused, I think, for caster builds. Just getting a second level of rogue works very well on these characters. But that's not really what we're here for, it's just a nice bonus. What we're really here for is Rogue level 3, where we get to take Assassin Rogue. Assassin Rogue has Assassinate Ambush, which guarantees critical hits against any surprised enemy. Critical hits, of course, have Mortal Reminder attached to them, and so any surprised enemy is going to be locked down for a minimum of 2 turns, because we get guaranteed critical hits against them, locking them down with Mortal Reminder Fear, and then we can continuously apply that, preventing the enemy from ever acting. You can also, because of Assassin's Alacrity, where when you begin a combat, any actions you spent before combat start get refunded to you. This is very powerful for Warlocks who often want to open their combat with casting a concentration-based spell, like Darkness or Hunger of Hadar, and then spend subsequent turns of combat casting Eldritch Blasts. Well, with Assassin's Alacrity on this character, you can open with Hunger of Hadar, which surprises the enemy, inflicting the surprise condition. That means that they are then trapped in the Hunger of Hadar for a minimum of 2 turns, because they're going to begin their turn and stay in it, and then pass the turn because they're surprised and stay in it until the next turn, where they will then have to start their second turn in Hunger of Hadar, so you're getting double value out of your Hunger of Hadars as a result of that. But then also you get all your actions back, so you can do that and fire Eldritch Blasts on your first turn of combat, so you can lock down widely spaced enemies, or just concentrate on hitting all of the enemies at once with Fears, critical hits, and Hunger of Hadar damage. It's very powerful to be able to lead with an AoE spell and then refund all your actions with Assassin, and then add in a bunch of additional Eldritch Blasts. And of course you can also get your bonus action back, so you can bonus action hide again and stuff like that. All of those together make for an incredibly powerful opening turn of combat, and whenever you get to initiate combat, you're going to place Hunger of Hadar on enemies, slowing and blinding them because they're in difficult terrain, and trapping them in darkness, and then surprising them, so they're going to pass their first turn, hit them with Mortal Reminder critical hits, which stacks Fear on them, preventing them from moving even longer, and so enemies are going to be trapped in the darkness. Then when they get out, you can push them back in with Repelling Blast, so you can keep them consistently trapped and feared inside of your Hunger of Hadar. An extremely powerful combination that just guarantees the Mortal Reminder criticals, which is very valuable. Not to mention that it just does great damage to be getting additional damage dice on your Eldritch Blasts. And for combats where you just want more damage, you can use Hex instead of Hunger and get guaranteed Hex criticals, doubling the damage dice from Hex as well, which is very powerful, and is going to result in opening damage salvos of like 80 or 90 damage, even at this level, which is pretty good, plus all of the crowd control effects that you're applying. From here, the core combination of the build is online, so there's a couple different directions we could take it. I think the best direction, honestly, is just to continue on down Warlock, but you could add in fighter levels for Action Surge and even more powerful opening Novas in combat. But overall, just getting access to higher level spell slots from Warlock, I think, is going to be our best bet. At level 6, Great Old One Warlock, also you get Entropic Ward, which just lets you give disadvantage to an enemy. It's basically Warding Flare, which is an extremely powerful defensive ability. Doesn't have a cooldown or anything, or doesn't use a resource, so just once per turn, enemies are much more likely to miss you. Now, granted, enemies will usually have disadvantage because you'll usually be hiding in darkness, and they won't attack you that often, but this does make you even more resilient. And then we also get to take higher level spells here. You can grab Hypnotic Pattern, just a great disable. Something like that is always very useful to have, and is something that I think that most parties should have access to. Hunger of Hadar is going to be your usual go-to, but Hypnotic Pattern makes an excellent backup. Or we could be on theme and just take Fear. Fear is very powerful and very good against enemies who get close to you, though the fact is that you have lots of ways to apply Fear already, and your main struggle is enemies who are immune to Fear. So I recommend grabbing Hypnotic Pattern just so that you can hit most other enemies who are immune to Fear with that instead. At Warlock level 7, we get access to 4th level spells, as well as another Invocation. So, for our 4th level spell selection, I think there's really 2 choices that make sense. One is Banishment, and Banishment is so good because it targets the enemy's Charisma save. Lots of very powerful enemies in the game have very low Charisma saves, so this can be used to pull them out of a combat and make your combat significantly easier while you clean up all the adds or additional enemies in the combat, and a lot of extremely dangerous late game bosses have very weak charisma saves, so you can basically guarantee landing Banishment. The other option is Evard's Black Tentacles, which, while normally not an amazing spell just because it uses a very high level spell slot and mostly duplicates the effect of Entangle, which is a level 1 spell. On Warlock, it doesn't matter what level your spells are, because they all use the same resource, the same level spell slot, so Evard's Tentacles is still pretty good, and in fact, I think is worth replacing one of these spells with. Probably. At this level, you are likely not casting Hex that often, and you probably have better uses for your spells than Armor of Agathys. I'd most likely replace Hex with Evard's if you want it, and this can be used to trap enemies in other effects if you have other party members who have damaging effects. Most of the time, you're going to be using Hunger of Hadar and Mortal Reminder to just keep enemies trapped in place, but this is a good alternative if that's something that you want. For our Invocation here, we are going to... There's a lot of utility options you could take if you're really feeling like you want proficiency in Deception and Persuasion. You could grab those and respec your skills into other skills or something like that. But the best one is almost certainly just taking Confusion. Confusion is just another very powerful disable. This can be cast into grouped allies and enemies. And one thing that this character does struggle with is it has some collateral damage with Hunger of Hadar, so it can sometimes be difficult to place your damaging AoE effects if your allies and enemies are all mixed up together. Especially relevant, as people sometimes have pointed out in my comments, in co-op mode, where your buddies may be moving their characters somewhat at random, and this can help you to mitigate that if your cool pal is running their barbarian willy-nilly into all the enemies, as they are wont to do. Confusion is just a very powerful debuff, and the fact that this casts with a Warlock spell, unlike a lot of the other Warlock slot, unlike a lot of the other invocations, which are once per day uses, means that it's just basically adding another spell to your list, which is very good. Then at Warlock level 8, we get to max out our Charisma, and that's obviously great because it increases the save DC of our spells and the damage of our Eldritch Blasts. In addition, you can add more Charisma using the Mirror of Loss and Ethel's Hair to get up to a possible total of 24, which makes your save DCs incredibly high and gives you +7 to damage on every Eldritch Blast attack, which is obviously very valuable as well. So that's an additional option. If you feel like you don't need more Charisma, Alert is also very good on this character, so if you wanted to use stop at 20 or 22 charisma with some of the story-based charisma bonuses you can have, or the items that increase your charisma, Alert is so good for this character that it may be worth reducing your charisma by 2 to get it, even though this is one of the most stat-hungry characters in the game. It's very good with Eldritch Blast, but Alert is just an incredible feat for this character, since enemies the only thing that enemies will ever put you in danger is if enemies act first, because once you've gone, they won't be able to take a meaningful action for the rest of the combat, because they'll be frightened and trapped and surprised and so on. And then for our spell selection here, we're just going to grab the other AoE disable spells. I like having a large selection of these AoE disable spells, so you can pick the perfect one for these fights. Although if you're still casting Hex, you can go back and grab that again. If you feel like you need other utility spells like invisibility, there's definitely other options. For me personally, I think that the way that Warlocks play out is you're going to be choosing the perfect spell for the encounter and then casting that, and then Eldritch Blasting for the rest of the encounter. So having a wide array of these concentration spells means that you'll always have the perfect spell, the A+ spell for that encounter, and never have to settle for second best. And I think that impacts your character's combat potential more than having something like a one-shot damaging spell or something along those lines would. Since Eldritch Blast is such a good default action, the thing that makes Warlocks strongest is just having the best opening action possible for that combat. And then finally, at character level 12, we get access to 5th level spells, and the best of these is probably Hold Monster. This gives you access to another very powerful concentration disable. It works on anything. It doesn't matter that it's a 5th level spell because although Hold Person can be multicast with Warlock spell slots, you can hit anything with it. But we already have lots of multicast disables, so I'm not that worried about Hold Person. Having one that works really well against single enemies is pretty nice, so Hold Monster is good. Telekinesis is also pretty cool. You can throw enemies off cliffs with it. It's another way to fling enemies backwards away from you, which is thematic for the build, of course, as well. But in general, I think that Hold Monster is going to be the better pick of the two, but either of these are very good. And then for our Eldritch Invocation, we're absolutely taking Conjure Elemental. Conjure Elemental lets us turn our 5th level Warlock slots into the elementals, and those are incredibly valuable for this character, just giving you a way to turn a short rest resource, a Warlock spell slot, into something that lasts all day. The fact that Minions of Chaos summons with a Warlock spell slot means you can use these elementals to tank or whatever very effectively. It basically gives you 200 more hit points per short rest, because you can always replace them when they die, and so that's very strong as well. And of course they add a bunch of additional damage, tanking, utility, and blocking up enemy movement, which is very valuable. All 4 of the different elementals I think are very strong, so which you take is up to you, and I recommend experimenting with them. By default, I think the Water Elemental is the best of them if you have any synergy with water effects in your party, but overall, any of the 4 are very strong, and it's definitely worth playing around with them to see which fits your particular party comp the best. That's the build. So most of the time you are going to open combat from stealth, and then you are going to... we can't stealth there. You're going to open combat from stealth, and then you are going to cast Hunger of Hadar to surprise an enemy. And then on the surprised enemy, you're going to cast a series of Eldritch Blasts, which will frighten them. You will have a Conjure Elemental and an Armor of Agathyst up from your first short rest of the day, potentially, if that's something that you wanted to maintain all day. And you can also have Animate Dead because you're a Tome Warlock, so all of the summon options are available to you, which is very powerful as well. And you're going to be locking down enemies in debilitating field effects, preventing them from ever acting. We can power up this build even more, of course, with items, but one of the great things about it is that it's extremely item independent. You are just going to want mostly critical hit gear, just anything that increases your critical hit, and obviously best in slot for Warlocks is always the Potent Robe. This character wears the Gloves of Dexterity very well as well, just for bonus initiative and armor class. Extremely useful if you are in the Potent Robe, and the Potent Robe gives you additional damage equal to your Charisma on your Eldritch Blasts. This character also benefits very heavily from just wearing a shield, which is why we wanted to grab shield proficiency, and the Sentinel Shield or other shields that give you bonus initiative are very good, or the ones that give you bonus save DC are very powerful as well. A fun early game option for main hand weapon also is the Nature's Snare. This it has a chance to ensnare enemies. It's a DC 13 check every time they get hit by an attack from you, and that works on spell attack rolls, so it works with Eldritch Blasts. So if you have Nature's Snare, it's just an additional chance. It's a relatively low save DC, but it's an additional chance every time you fire an Eldritch Blast, and it works against things that are immune to fear of trapping enemies in place, so that can make your combo even more reliable. Other than that, you're just looking for save DC gear and critical hit gear to make your critical hits more likely after your opening round of guaranteed criticals, but for the most part, this character is going to be very item independent and not conflict with any other items that your party might need. Alright, my friends, hope you've enjoyed this video, and of course, as always, if you have, feel free to leave a comment and like the video. Both of those things help me out a ton with the algorithm, which cares very much about people interacting with the videos, so I really appreciate people taking the time to do that. It means a lot for people getting to see these, and for the success of my channel, especially in the long term as the Baldur's Gate community continues on into the more mature phase of the game. And you can, of course, subscribe to my channel for more of this and other strategy game guides and analysis, and I'll catch you next time. Cheers, folks. GG.